Hi, welcome everyone to a new episode of Technique Tuesday. This week we're going to be looking at how to perform several different shrug variations with perfect technique. But before we get into the technique itself, let's have a quick look at the biomechanics and anatomy involved first. So with the shrug, we're mainly targeting the upper trapezius and levator scapulae muscles through scapular elevation. So basically just lifting your shoulder blades up. Now we'll also be performing scapular upward rotation, as we shouldn't simply be shrugging the barbell straight up, but also bringing the shoulders in closer to the neck. So when viewed from the back, you can see that this is going to result in the shoulder blades rotating upward, an action handled by the upper and mid traps exclusively. And this upward rotation component is important, so try to remember it as we'll be applying it here in a minute. And even though we won't emphasize it much, there will be some degree of scapular retraction occurring, meaning the mid and lower traps will be active to some degree as well. So the traditional shrug where you load the barbell up and just shrug it up seems to be a bit of a hit or miss exercise. Some people feel a very strong upper trap contraction, while others feel it mostly in the levator scapulae muscle, more along the side of the neck. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with engaging the neck musculature, we're going to be covering that in a separate future Technique Tuesday episode with direct neck training exercises. And we're going to instead focus our efforts here on really isolating those beefy upper trap fibers. So there are two important concepts I'd like to emphasize here from the outset that we're going to be applying pretty much to every shrug variation. First, one 1994 cadaver study found that because of the orientation of the upper trap fibers, they can't as effectively elevate the scapulae when the arm is in neutral, meaning that the traps will be recruited more effectively with the arms in about 30 degrees of abduction. And second, the traps are more effective at scapular upward rotation than the other shrugging muscles, meaning that if the goal is to isolate the traps, we should be focusing on this scapular upward rotation component of the lift. So with this in mind, I'll just say up front here that my current personal favorite variation on the shrug is the trap bar shrug. And I like it because it automatically forces your arms into just about 30 degrees of abduction. And because you stand inside the bar frame, you don't need to worry about the barbell rubbing up against the front of your body as you shrug. However, not everyone has access to a trap bar, so we'll be covering the traditional barbell shrug here first, and then some creative alternatives after. But you'll just want to keep in mind that most of the same basic techniques will apply across these variations. Now in general, I recommend loading the shrug in a more moderate rep range, something around 8 to 15 reps, because loading the shrug more heavily will more often than not impair your ability to take the weight through a full range of motion, especially at the top end of the range. Now a power shrug where you get more hip and leg drive involved to help hoist the weight up can be used as an advanced cheating technique. However, it should still be performed with eccentric control, meaning you don't just let the weight fall down, and it should be used sparingly and only once you've already mastered technique on the proper strict shrug first. So you want to set up the bar in a power rack above knee height so you can easily unrack the barbell without fatiguing your lower back. Grab the bar with a double overhand grip at about 1.25 to 1.5 times shoulder width. And I think that using straps to truly overload the traps on the shrug will be necessary for most lifters. However, if developing grip strength is an equal priority for you, you want to make sure you do at least one heavy set without straps. While maintaining a neutral lower back, you want to drive your hips forward to unrack the bar, similar to how you'd lock out a deadlift. If you're standing inside the rack, you can just stay put, but if you're shrugging outside the rack, as I'll do here for demonstration purposes, then you can take 2 or 3 steps back with the bar and plant your feet slightly wider than shoulder width with a slight foot flare. Now, at this point, you want to lean your torso slightly forward by about 10 degrees by hinging at the hips, and you want to make sure that your scapulae aren't protracting, meaning your upper back should be neutral and engaged. Your knees should be nearly straight. However, a slight bend in the knees and hips can prevent the bar from getting in the way of your manhood on the way up. So you want to elevate your scapulae by not only lifting your shoulders up, but also pulling them in as if trying to touch your shoulders to your ears. And this inward drive is really important because remember that we not only want to perform scapular elevation, but also scapular upward rotation. So to emphasize this further, you can think about pushing your arms slightly outward as if doing a lateral raise, which is really gonna drive the shoulders both up and in. You wanna shrug the weight all the way up until you reach terminal elevation, or the point where you can no longer elevate the scapulae any further, regardless of the load. And you can think about squeezing at the top, but there's no need to pause or hold the shrug in that terminally elevated position. Simply just reverse the motion by lowering the weight back down under control as the traps actively stretch, resisting the load on the way down. Now, there are a bunch of creative modifications on the basic shrug that I like. The Smith machine shrug can be used if your lower back is hurting or fatigued, as it can take some of the stress off your lower back when you lean slightly forward. However, just in general, I think that a Smith machine shouldn't permanently replace a free weight option. And similar to the trap bar, dumbbell shrugs are a nice alternative since they eliminate the problem of having the barbell rub up against you. However, trying to maintain some degree of abduction can cause the lateral delt to become a limiting factor, and most dumbbells may simply be too light at a certain level of advancement. But I do like them for doing high rep or slow rep work. The standing calf raise shrug is another reasonable option for isolating the traps if your grip ability happens to be compromised. So these are all fine, but I think my favorite creative variation is the dual cable shrug, which is almost always a great fix for anyone struggling to feel their traps firing with traditional shrugs. So you want to stand in the middle of a cable rack and grab the two D handles so that when viewed from the side, the cables run directly through the mid-frontal plane. Lean your torso slightly forward as before by about 10 degrees and think about shrugging the cables up and in toward your ears. You can also slightly abduct your upper arms, similar to what you do in a lateral raise, which is going to increase the upward rotation range of motion, allowing the upper traps to reach peak contraction. And here you can see Dr. Mike Israetel performing the same basic exercise, but allowing his arms to bend a bit near the top, which isn't required, but may help you get a stronger trap contraction. And I think this variation is more effectively loaded a bit lighter than the standard shrug, so I'd recommend loading more in the 12 to 20 rep zone here, focusing more on establishing a strong mind-muscle connection rather than focusing on overloading with heavy weight. Now, I would say the most common error that I see on the shrug is simply going way too heavy. The shrug shouldn't be a test of how much weight you can hold with straps on, and going too heavy can really cut the range of motion way too short. Now, remember that a properly performed shrug actually should have a pretty large range of motion, and you should be making it a goal to reach that point of terminal scapular elevation on every rep. So just because you're loading up the bar with progressively heavier weights doesn't mean you're actually progressively overloading the traps. You may just be progressively reducing the range of motion. So don't be afraid to lighten the weights, get your form in check, and gradually build your way back up while keeping form consistent from week to week. Another very common error is rolling the shoulders forward or backward, or allowing your scapulae to protract and retract. The upper traps can elevate the scapulae most effectively when they're in neutral or retracted, so you should keep them in the same position and maintain that upper back tightness throughout the range of motion. And rolling your shoulders is only going to throw you out of position and create form inconsistencies. And if you're protracting to avoid hitting your crotch, I think you should instead create that slight forward lean by hinging at the hips or using dumbbells or one of the other non-barbell variations that we discussed. So guys, that is all that I have for the shrug. Now, there still are other programming factors like frequency, volume, and other movements like the deadlift and rack pulls that I've discussed in detail in my neck and trap science explained video, if you'd like to check that out, and I'll have that linked down below. And I always get questions about my training gear, so stuff like belts and straps, so you can check out the description box for my recommendations there and some discounts. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future Technique Tuesday episodes, and I'll see you guys all here next Tuesday.